which is the 5th position. It's a nice comfortable area of the neck. It's not too high up and not too far down to where the frets are further apart. So what we're going to do is talk a little bit about this note F before I even give you the patterns. If you remember when we did Dorian, our primary note, the note that gave the scale the color, was the F sharp. Now when we go to Aeolian, or the natural minor scale, you can call it two things, F is going to be our primary note. Because it's related to C major. A minor and C major are related chords. C major is the parent major chord. A minor is the relative minor, or the 6th chord, the minor 6th chord. The Aeolian scale, therefore, if you're thinking ahead, you're probably thinking, well, wait a minute, then they must have the same scale. Yes, they do have the same scale. The only difference is that C major starts on C, obviously. A minor is going to start on A. But really, they're the same notes. If I start this A minor scale on C, it's going to sound like C major. So they're really the same notes, you're just starting on a different root. Root note meaning the note of either a chord or the scale. Okay, so this F is very important in that it's going to give the Aeolian scale a completely different flavor than the Dorian had. When you go to a D chord in Aeolian, it's going to be a D minor chord. When we went to a D chord in Dorian, it was D major, or D7, or D9. That is, once again, a little bit further ahead for some of you than I'm comfortable talking about right at the moment, but I just want to start feeding you this information because as we go, you're going to start soaking it in. If I even teach a beginner student, I'm constantly talking about theory. I never do a guitar lesson without bringing up theoretical concepts at least 20 times. Like I said before, you've got to know your theory when you're playing an instrument. You can't just be one of those guitar players who basically just flies around the instrument but doesn't really know what he or she is doing. You really want to know the theory behind it. So this F note is going to be very critical to the sound of the scale. Number one, the D minor chord has the F in it. If I play an F chord, which is also in the key of A minor, there's your F. If I want to play a C chord and suspend it, it's suspended with an F. So as you can see, that F note is going to come in handy. Now, I left out the most important chord, G7. Right? Is G7 a part of A minor? Well, it can be. It depends. It's more a part of C major. Typically, when you're in A minor, you go to G major. And then you go down to F. A very common chord progression used in practically every style of music you will deal with throughout your life. So I left out one important chord that has F in it, and that's G7. That's just a G major chord here, but if I do a G7, those of you who are learning your basic chords, this is not my favorite chord. That's a G7 chord. It's like a C chord expanded out. Okay, it's got an F in it. The F is what makes the G7 a 7. So that note's in there. Now, when you're in the key of A minor, you don't really use G7, you use G major. This progression should be very familiar. Okay, you notice I didn't do G7, for those of you who know bar chords. I did G major. But still, this F note, as you can see, it pivots around a lot of these chords that we're going to be using. Therefore, I want you to just be aware of that. Now, your other F is here. But typically, when you play melodies on the guitar, your melodies, in general, are going to be on the upper strings. I mean, there are going to be times when you'll play a melody on a lower string, but it just doesn't sound good to play melodies on a guitar in a lower register. It always sounds better, and they jump out more on recordings if you play them in the upper register.